How can a social hierarchy, one that was born in South Asia 4,000 years ago, a system that's all about ritual purity and what you inherit, how can that be operating right now, today, in, of all places, Silicon Valley?
It's this incredible paradox.
It really is. I mean, we think of the tech world as the ultimate meritocracy.
Exactly. And yet you have this silent reality affecting thousands of people. We're talking about engineers, analysts, people who are absolutely essential to the U.S. economy.
And many of them are forced to hide a huge part of who they are.
A core part of their identity. And it's out of fear of being excluded, of their careers just stalling, or worse. And we know this fear is real. When you think about the focus for this deep dive, a Dalit engineer, let's call him, working at a huge company like Meta, he's under this constant pressure.
The pressure that if anyone finds out his true background, his whole career could just collapse.
Right. And that hidden struggle, that's really what we're going to get into today.
We want to get at the origins of this thing, the caste system, and really understand the mechanism. How did it migrate across oceans so successfully?
And we'll look at the impact, the truly shocking impact it has on employees here in the U.S.
And then there's this massive ongoing legal and corporate fight, the fight to even recognize this kind of discrimination, let alone legislate against it.
What's so fascinating here, I think, is how it's this intersection of ancient history and, 21st century globalization.
Absolutely.
The sources just paint this really clear and sometimes grim picture of how U.S. immigration policy, specifically the H-1B visa program, inadvertently transplanted this entire social structure.
So it favored a certain group.
It favored the already privileged. So for years, this is a totally invisible hierarchy. But now, the American workplace, places like San Jose, Seattle, they have become the new battleground for this ancient fight.
Okay, so our source material is really rich on this. We've got the historical context, the legal background, major U.S. court cases.
The big one, the Cisco case.
The Cisco case, definitely. And the huge public policy debates in California over Senate Bill 403. Plus, we have survey data that just lays bare the profound fear among Dalit professionals right here.
So I think before we get into the modern fight, we have to start at the very beginning. What exactly is this system?
Let's do it.
To really get the scale of it, we have to go back to the foundation. So, caste. It's defined as a hereditary system of social stratification.
Hereditary being the key word.
The absolute key. It originated in Hindu scripture, though you see it across different faiths and cultures in South Asia over time, and it was put into practice as early as 1500 BCE.
1500 BCE, so we're talking about something truly ancient.
Deeply ancient. And its whole orientation is a hierarchy of ritual status, purity, and occupation. It dictates, pretty much everything in your life based purely on who you were born to.
And I think it's so important to stress, this isn't just an economic class system. It's not something you can just work your way out of.
No, absolutely not. You could be incredibly wealthy, but if you're born into a certain caste, your ritual status, your supposed purity, is fixed for life.
So what did that structure actually look like?
It's based on these four main groupings. They're called the Varnas, and they form this really rigid, pyramid-like structure.
Okay.
At the very top, you have the Brahmins. They're traditionally the priests, the scholars, the intellectual class.
Right, and then below them.
Below them are the Kshatriyas. These are the warriors and rulers, the administrative and political class, you could say.
And then descending further.
Then you get the Vaishyas, who were traditionally merchants, traders, landowners. And then at the very bottom of this four-tiered system, you have the Shudras.
The laborers.
The peasants, the manual laborers. Their role, their duty was basically to serve the other three groups. But the sources are clear. This is just a broad outline.
So it gets even more granular.
Oh, much more. These four main groups are divided into about 3,000 castes, or jatis, and then those are broken down into something like 25,000 subcastes.
25,000. Wow.
And every single one is tied to a specific traditional job and set of rituals.
And the most oppressive part of this, from what I understand, is just how rigid it is. There's no moving up.
Exactly. Social mobility, even just mingling between castes, it's essentially prevented. The structure doesn't just organize your job. It organizes who you can marry, where you can live, even who you can sit down and share a meal with.
Which brings us to the group that is, in a way, so oppressed, they fall completely outside of that system.
Right. These are the Dalits. They were formerly known as Untouchables.
And that term, untouchable, It comes from a very real, very brutal practice.
A millennia-old practice of untouchability. It's this apartheid-like system that deemed these people to be ritually polluted. And because they were polluted, they were seen as pollutants themselves.
So what did that ritual pollution actually mean in day-to-day life? What kind of restrictions were put on people?
The sources describe a life of just intense segregation. Dalits were forced into jobs that were considered impure.
Like what?
Tasks involving human waste, so cleaning toilets, disposing of dead animals, all kinds of what was effectively slave labor. And because their touch, or in some cases even their shadow, was considered polluting,
Their shadow.
they were forced into segregated neighborhoods. They couldn't use the same village wells or go to the same temples. They were often denied access to the most basic resources. It's a system designed to create social and economic deprivation across generations.
And even though untouchability was legally abolished in India's constitution back in 1950, and that was spearheaded by the great Dalit reformer Dr. Ambedkar, that piece of paper didn't just erase thousands of years of prejudice overnight.
Not at all. And the sources give us some really grim statistics that just underscore how severe this discrimination still is in India today. And this is the crucial background for the fear we see transplanted right into the U.S.
Okay, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Well, one source indicates that as recently as 2025, 27% of Indians admitted to openly practicing untouchability.
Admitted to it.
Admitted to it. And most experts think the real number is much, much higher.
And to really grasp the scale of the violence here, the annual statistics from India's National Crime Records Bureau, they're just devastating.
They are. When you extrapolate them, they show that every single hour, 2 Dalits are assaulted.
Every hour.
Every day, 3 Dalit women are raped, 2 Dalits are murdered, and 2 Dalit homes are burned down.
And the justice system.
That's what's so chilling. It's the impunity. The conviction rate for rapes against Dalit women is horrifyingly under 2%.
Under 2%.
And that isn't just a failure of the legal system. It's a symptom of the system where the victims have basically no power to seek justice.
The power dynamics these numbers reveal are just staggering. There are 200 million Dalits in India.
And they make up 90% of all poor Indians and 95% of all illiterate Indians. They're just locked out of prosperity.
And in sharp contrast, you look at who benefits from the system. The Brahmins, for example.
Exactly. They hold more than 70% of government posts, 78% of judicial positions in India. There was another study cited from 2012 that found among board members of India's top 1,000 businesses, 90% were from the dominant populations.
So the system is just functioning exactly as it was designed to concentrate power and privilege and keep it there.
It is.
So we've established the sheer intensity of this system in its home country. The question now is, how on earth did this hierarchy not only survive the journey across the globe, but become this defining, if hidden, issue for tech companies in San Francisco and Seattle?
Well, to understand that journey, you really have to look back at the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Now, this act was designed to be progressive. It got rid of the old racist quotas that favored, Northern Europeans, and it shifted the focus to skilled immigration.
STEM fields, mostly.
Exactly. Science, technology, engineering, medicine.
So the goal was to create a merit-based, non-discriminatory immigration system. But it looks like there was a huge unintended consequence.
A major one. Because the new system prioritized education and high-skilled expertise, it basically acted as a demographic filter.
Meaning?
Well, who historically had access to the best education and institutional support in India.
The upper castes. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas.
Overwhelmingly. They benefited from centuries of social and economic dominance. So the U.S., in its search for meritocracy, accidentally created this talent pipeline that was already heavily stratified from the very start. It just favored the privileged.
And lower caste individuals, people like Dalits who faced systemic discrimination and didn't have access to those credentials. They were far less likely to qualify for those visas.
That's the mechanism of transplantation. And you can connect these patterns directly to the tech industry and the geographical concentration we see today.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
Indians make up about 80% of the total U.S. South Asian population, and the largest communities are right where you'd expect. The big economic hubs. California, New York, New Jersey, Texas.
And the numbers tied to the H-1B visa are even more stark.
They are. The H-1B is for graduate-level, high-skilled workers. In 2019 alone, 71.7% of all H-1B visas went to Indian applicants.
Over 70%.
And if you look at where those people go, it becomes even clearer. Today, nearly 70% of all H-1B visa holders work specifically in the technology industry.
So that creates this perfect storm in Silicon Valley. It becomes the central ecosystem where this hierarchy just rematerializes.
It's a closed-loop system. The U.S. wanted the world's best talent. The social structures in India made sure that talent pool was heavily weighted toward the upper castes, and that demographic brought their social structures right along with them.
And the sources show the local impact of this is just acute. I mean, Silicon Valley's entire economy is defined by this concentration of immigrant talent.
Absolutely. The region's dependence on this highly educated, highly concentrated workforce means that H-1B policies, application fees, even the visa lottery results, they have huge financial impacts on the region. The whole system is tied up in this.
And for a long time, no one outside the South Asian community even noticed this was happening.
Right. Because the people who historically came to the U.S. were so disproportionately from the upper castes, caste itself became culturally invisible to non-South Asians.
You just saw a lot of high-achieving professionals and assumed the system they came from was meritocratic.
Or that caste was just some ancient historical relic. But the sources note this is changing now. The hierarchy that was invisible is being outed.
What's causing that shift?
It's really affirmative action policies in India. Over the last few decades, they've slowly started to diversify the immigrant pool coming to the U.S.
So more Dalits and other oppressed caste individuals are getting the education they need to qualify for H-1Bs.
Exactly. And they arrive in the U.S. and they start to challenge the existing social control that was established by the overwhelmingly upper caste diaspora that was already here. And that influx of diversity has just made the issue impossible to ignore anymore.
That makes perfect sense. The more diverse the diaspora becomes, the harder it is for the dominant group to maintain that invisible hierarchy.
Right. And you see conflicting experiences here. I mean, some sources do suggest that for a few people, working in the U.S. has the effect of erasing the traditional stigma.
The American dream.
It's the ideal, right, that meritocracy can win out. But the overwhelming evidence shows that for most people, the social structures follow them right across the ocean, and it demands that they hide who they are.
Okay, let's focus on that suppression. This brings us right back to that core fear. The need for someone like Siddhant, the engineer at Meta, to hide his caste. Is this just anecdotal, or is this something we can actually measure?
Oh, it is backed up by hard data. And it really confirms how systemic the problem is. There was a 2016 survey, Caste in the United States, done by Equality Labs.
And that gave us the statistics that really define this experience.
It gave us some truly chilling numbers. It found that 52% of Dalits in the U.S. feared being outed for their caste identity.
Over half.
Over half live in active fear. And get this. Nearly two-thirds, 67%, reported experiencing caste-based discrimination at their workplaces.
So most of the community is experiencing discrimination, while half of them are actively hiding who they are. That points to this widespread structural exclusion.
And a deep fear of reprisal. And it wasn't just, subtle microaggressions. It went way beyond the office.
Where else was it happening?
40% of Dalits in the survey said they'd faced discrimination in educational institutions.
At universities?
Yes. They talked about prejudice in the classroom, in dining halls, in housing. There was specific reports of dominant caste students openly refusing to share apartments and dorms with them.
That's blatant.
And disturbingly, 26% reported experiencing physical assault based on their caste. So the violence of the system has also, unfortunately, made it to the U.S.
This is where that tension becomes so visceral, right? The clash between a high-tech, supposedly welcoming environment and this deep-seated, inherited bias. The sources detail the story of Prem Periyar.
His story really personalizes the harm in a way that statistics just can't. He came to the U.S. from Nepal in 2015.
And his experience was stark from the beginning.
Immediately. He was working at an Indian restaurant when he first arrived in California. The owner gave him a room, but the other workers, as soon as they found out he was Dalit, they refused to room with him.
Just flat out refused.
He later said he heard so many casteist slurs, words that dehumanized and insulted me, and the discrimination was so relentless that he actually became homeless. He lived out of an RV van for a month because he couldn't find stable housing among his own community.
And this is the severity of the prejudice we're talking about, happening right here in the U.S., often within the same immigrant community that's also facing racism from the outside.
And in the tech world specifically, the sources say caste is just deeply ingrained in Indian culture, which makes it so portable. We have testimony from professionals about an unspoken law.
An unspoken law.
Yeah. Some workers would outright refuse to talk to others if they were a lower caste. There were clear expectations about deference and disrespect between castes within the professional hierarchy.
And the people who benefit from this, the managers, the senior engineers from upper castes, they have a vested interest in keeping this quiet.
A huge vested interest in obfuscating it and keeping it invisible. Their advantage relies on that obscurity.
So what happens when someone who's suffering under the system, like Siddhant, decides to speak up, to challenge the bias they're facing from a manager or colleagues?
This is where the whole system becomes a mechanism of control, because those individuals often won't speak up precisely because so many of them have these fragile work-based immigration statuses, the H-1B visa.
Let's break that down. Why is the H-1B status so fragile?
Because it is fundamentally tied to a single employer.
So if you report harassment, you're risking a lot more than just your current job.
Exactly. If your employer retaliates, if they fire you, or just let the toxic environment get so bad that you quit, you risk losing your immigration status completely. You could be forced to leave the country.
That gives managers and higher caste colleagues this immense, almost unchecked power.
It forces silence. It forces compliance, which is why 67% reported discrimination. But for years, very few people took any formal action. Not until the legal pressure started building from the outside.
It's a lever of control that goes so far beyond typical workplace politics. And there's another layer here too, right? A kind of dual prejudice.
Yes, a recent survey from 2025 of non-resident Indian professionals found that while race was the #1 form of bias they face...
From the broader U.S. society.
Right. About 44% reported unfair treatment because of their race. But the second most reported form of bias was regional identity, distinctions between North and South Indian backgrounds.
So there's this dual burden.
A huge dual burden. You face external racism from American society, and you face this internal diaspora bias prejudice from within your own community, rooted in caste or regional dominance. And that internal system influences everything.
Like who gets recommended for a job?
Who gets included in professional networks, who gets a good performance review, who gets promoted. It becomes a self-reinforcing systemic machine.
And it was this hidden reality, the fear, the exclusion, the immigration status trap that finally dragged caste into the U.S. legal system. Which brings us to the landmark Cisco case in 2020.
A truly pivotal moment. It took the issue out of the shadows of corporate HR departments and put it right into a public courtroom.
This was the first time in U.S. history, right? That caste was the central issue in a major discrimination lawsuit.
The very first time. The California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, now it's called the Civil Rights Department, or CRD, they filed a lawsuit against Cisco.
And the allegation?
They alleged caste-based discrimination against a Dalit engineer. They said he was subjected to a hostile work environment and denied opportunities by his higher caste Indian American managers.
So California was making this groundbreaking argument that even though caste isn't explicitly named in the Civil Rights Act, it's still actionable under existing protections.
Specifically ancestry. That was the hook. And Cisco, at first, fought it hard. They claimed there were no legal grounds for a lawsuit like this under U.S. law.
And then came the major development in the summer of 2025.
Yes. A U.S. federal court issued a landmark ruling. And this was so critical because it wasn't just about the facts of the Cisco case. It upheld California's fundamental authority to act against caste discrimination using the laws it already had.
That is a huge distinction.
Yeah.
And what did the court say to the opposition?
They completely rejected the claims made by the Hindu American Foundation, or HAF. HAF argued that protecting against caste discrimination would violate the religious rights of Hindus.
And the court said?
They dismissed that argument as entirely unpersuasive. The ruling affirmed the state's constitutional right to enforce its anti-discrimination laws and confirmed the Cisco lawsuit was a totally legitimate public enforcement action.
And the court also rejected HAF's standing to even try to block the case. So this federal endorsement just gave massive momentum to the whole anti-caste movement.
And it wasn't just happening in the courts. The sources show a clear corporate response. Big tech realized they just couldn't ignore this anymore.
Apple was the first big domino to fall.
They were. Around August 2022, Apple updated its employee conduct policy to explicitly prohibit discrimination on the basis of caste.
They just added the word right in there.
Added it right alongside race, religion, gender, age, and ancestry. And importantly, it wasn't just a paper policy change.
They actually started training people on it.
Exactly. Apple started training its managers on the Indian task system. That's a proactive effort to educate staff and, mitigate their own risk. And it set a powerful precedent for the rest of big tech.
And all of this was happening alongside this growing legislative momentum at the local level.
Absolutely. In February 2023, Seattle became the first U.S. city to officially ban caste discrimination, a huge grassroots victory.
And the movement was also gaining steam in higher education.
Yes, often starting with union negotiations. The Harvard Graduate Student Union contract in late 2021 was a key early win, and then that spread to university-wide policies at places like Rutgers, Brown, Brandeis, UC Davis.
So all this institutional recognition just solidified the idea that caste discrimination is a real, legitimate form of bias that has to be addressed explicitly.
And that set the stage for the big political battle in California, which had the chance to be the first state in the nation to do this. Senate Bill 403.
SB 403, the bill that tried to add caste directly into California's civil rights laws.
Right. It sought to amend two crucial laws: the Fair Employment and Housing Act, FEHI, and the Unruh Civil Rights Act.
And FEHI is the big one for workplaces.
It's key. It protects employees from discrimination. Unruh covers public accommodations like housing. By adding caste as a protected characteristic, they hope to provide undeniable clarity for victims.
The bill passed overwhelmingly in the state legislature, didn't it?
Overwhelmingly. Huge support in both houses. And yet, despite that, it hit a wall.
Governor Gavin Newsom.
He vetoed it in 2023. He argued it was unnecessary because, in his view, the existing laws were already good enough. And that veto was just a stinging defeat for advocates, especially after they held a month-long hunger strike outside his office.
So it really crystallizes the whole debate. Is explicitly naming caste totally necessary, or is it just redundant?
That's the central question.
Okay, let's dig into that policy debate. Governor Newsom's veto rationale, it really mirrored the main arguments from the opposition, which was primarily groups like the Hindu American Foundation.
Yeah.
What were their core contentions?
Well, their first and strongest claim was redundancy, just like Newsom said. They argued that existing California laws, especially FEH, already provide enough protection.
And their proof was the Cisco case.
Exactly. They pointed to it and said, look, the state is already using existing legal categories like ancestry or religion to hold discriminators accountable. So why do we need a new law if the current system is already working?
So the argument was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there was another, much more politically charged argument they made, wasn't there?
Yes, one centered on religion. Groups affiliated with the Hindu nationalist movement, led by AJF, argued that because caste is historically associated with Hinduism, a law explicitly against caste would unfairly target American Hindus.
The fear was one of profiling.
Right. They claimed it would subject their community to undue scrutiny and suspicion, even though the bill itself never mentioned any specific group or religion.
And they went so far as to call the state's case against Cisco unconstitutional and a violation of Hindus' religious freedom. How did they even make that connection?
Well, their argument was that if caste is inextricably linked to Hindu religious practice, then regulating behavior based on caste is, in effect, regulating religious practice.
Which the federal court completely rejected.
Completely. The court made it clear the state isn't regulating religious belief. It's regulating civil behavior, specifically employment discrimination, which is a state interest that trumps a claim of religious exemption. But the political concern lingered.
And they also raised concerns about the practical impact of just raising awareness about caste, especially for kids.
Yeah, opponents claim that making caste a public issue, maybe by asking about it at work or school, could traumatize students and subject them to bullying.
Basically, that making it visible would create more problems than it solved.
But bringing it out of the shadows was actually a bad thing. They favored continued cultural invisibility.
Okay, so those are the arguments against.
Yeah.
It's redundant, it targets a religion, and it could create more trauma. Now, what about the case made by Dalit advocates like Prem Pariyar for why explicit inclusion is absolutely necessary?
Their primary argument is all about clarity and recourse. By explicitly enshrining caste in civil rights law, you give Dalits a clear right to recourse.
So for someone like Siddhant, our engineer at Meta, if he's being denied a promotion because of his background,
it gives him a specific, undeniable cause of action. He doesn't have to jump through hoops to prove his case fits into some other category.
But why is that so important if the state proved they could use ancestry to prosecute the Cisco case?
Because relying on a broader category like ancestry forces the victim to argue that caste discrimination is just a proxy for something else.
When it's its own unique form of discrimination.
Exactly. Legal experts argue caste is a distinct category. It's rooted in hereditary transmission and ritual practice, and that's different from race or national origin. And when the law doesn't explicitly name the harm, it creates data gaps. It creates reporting reluctance.
People are afraid their claim won't be taken seriously.
Right. A Dalit professor at a CSU, cited in the sources, said that many people were hesitant to share their experiences precisely because caste wasn't a protected category. They feared their claim would just be dismissed as irrelevant under U.S. law. So explicit legislation overcomes that hurdle. It provides clear legal standing.
It gives both moral and legal legitimacy to the harm they've experienced. And proponents also had a really strong analogy within California law itself.
It's a powerful point. They noted that California already specifies things that are technically covered under broader categories. For example, the state explicitly lists gender identity and sexual orientation in its laws.
Even though the Supreme Court's Bostock decision says those are covered under sex.
Right. But California specifies them because the legislature felt it was important to be clear, to be precise, and to signal its intent to protect those communities explicitly. The logic for caste is identical. If the harm is specific, the protection should be specific.
And what about the opposition's claim of reverse discrimination? That giving Dalits these rights somehow harms the dominant group.
Dalit advocates called that argument deeply ironic. One lawyer pointed out that it's basically the same as saying race discrimination laws wrongly affect white people.
Or that gender discrimination laws wrongly affect men.
Exactly. When a marginalized group demands rights and dignity, it often creates anxiety and resistance from those who have historically benefited from inequality. But the goal is to establish equality, not to target anyone.
When you step back and look at the bigger picture, this whole debate over caste protection, it really fits into this broader trend in the U.S. of expanding our understanding of civil rights.
It's part of this continuous, necessary effort to have the law catch up with the complex realities of discrimination. You see it with things like the Crown Act,
Which protects against bias based on natural hairstyles.
Right, recognizing that hair bias is often just proxy racism, or you see it with laws banning discrimination based on height and weight, like New York City just enacted. The fight for caste protection is the latest and maybe the most culturally complex front in this ongoing expansion of civil rights.
It's really the ultimate test of that American promise of meritocracy, isn't it? When a system of inherited inequality is literally flown across the ocean and reestablished in the highest skilled workforce in the world, what does the law do to break it down?
We started this deep dive with that very personal story. A Dalit engineer, like Sidhant, working at a company like Meta, terrified of revealing his true self.
And what we've found is that his fear isn't an anomaly.
Not at all. It's backed by clear social patterns, by data showing widespread discrimination, and by this massive legal and legislative fight to bring this whole invisible hierarchy out into the light.
The central tension here is just profound. You have a 4,000-year-old social structure, hereditary, rigid, often brutal.
And it was successfully transported via global migration patterns and is now in a direct confrontation with the modern ideal of meritocracy in Silicon Valley.
And that battle is playing out everywhere. In the power dynamics between H-1B holders and their managers, in the policy shifts at companies like Apple, and in federal courtrooms, like we saw with the Cisco case.
So the question isn't really whether caste exists in the American diaspora anymore. Its existence is indisputable. You can see it in hiring practices, social exclusion, the fear of being outed.
The real pressing question, the one advocates and legislators are asking, is whether the United States will finally stop pretending not to see it.
And provide the explicit legal tools needed to dismantle it.
Exactly. So, for you, the learner, we want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We saw that the opposition to specific caste legislation, like the vetoed SB 403, really leaned on the idea that existing anti-discrimination laws are sufficient.
So consider this. What are the risks of relying on those broad existing categories like ancestry or religion to fight a form of discrimination that is so specific, so hereditary, and so often culturally obscured?
Compared to the risks of legislating a brand new, distinct protected class.
Think about that engineer in that fragile H-1B status. What practical difference does it make to his decision to report harassment if the law explicitly says caste, versus forcing him to argue that what's happening to him is just a proxy for ancestry? The stakes are immense for these communities, especially when their fight for justice is compounded by the precarity of their immigration status. What stands out to you as the most effective path forward for people experiencing this hidden inequality?
That's it for this deep dive. We look forward to seeing what you uncover next.